Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Eden Road podcast, where on today's show, we've got a mix of things to discuss. I think it's fair to say it's been another turbulent week for Brentford fans. We got the news a few days ago that Keith Andrews is expected to be appointed as the next Brentford head coach this week. That announcement still hasn't come yet, but what with all the reports, we thought it would be a good time to jump on. And we also got the news yesterday, and we're going to talk about how fast this transfer came around. That Christian Norgaard is leaving. Our club captain is leaving to go to Arsenal. So a lot of departures and potentially more to come. Craig, off the back of that, how are you?
I think that this is one of those therapy sessions that people keep referring to this as, and it's much needed, that's for sure.
Dan, how you doing, mate?
I'm all right. Has anyone put in a bid for us yet?
Yeah.
The Ely Road podcast will now be the Ely Road Palace.
Yeah. Just before we get into everything, remember to drop a comment down below with your thoughts around everything that's been going on surrounding Brentford over the last few days. Subscribe to the YouTube and Spotify channels. Follow us on the socials at the Eden Road on Twitter, at Eden Road Pod on Instagram. Tweet of the week, many to choose from. So much head loss on the timeline in recent days. I've got one from Uzi, one from Ryan MBFC, and then one from Josh BFC. I'll start with Uzi. Brentford may be Premier League on the pitch, but they've got the mentality of a National League club off it. You've been given £10 million in compensation, and you appoint a set-piece coach who's not even a League Two club wanted as their manager. Embarrassing organisation. You've then got Ryan saying, honestly, could be the most unambitious and depressing managerial appointment in Premier League history. Every single bit of positivity last season down the drain. Not that home support is any good anyway, but the atmosphere this season will be genuinely lifeless. Either of you thoughts over that before I go to Josh's, because this is more around Norgaard?
I think definitely if we don't start well, we'll see a reaction early on, just because to the outside, and I'm sure it's different on the inside, but to the outside, it looks like an appointment with not too much ambition. And it looks like, given his past and what we know of him, there's not too much to go off there. And it's not an appointment you could see any other Premier League club make. So I think on that basis, I think the fans will turn on him quickly if it doesn't work. I don't want that to happen, but I think that's almost inevitable based on who he is and the feeling around it when he's first coming in.
You said there, Dan, you said that you wouldn't expect any other Premier League club to make that appointment. But Craig, we aren't like any other Premier League club, are we?
No, apparently we're stupid enough to make an appointment like this. Look, first things first, Keith Andrews, yes, he is our set-piece coach, but Keith Andrews is not a set-piece coach. That has obviously been the forefront of people's minds, that we've just promoted a set-piece coach. Keith Andrews was brought in to Brentford as a set-piece coach because at the time that was the only role that we had open, and the club wanted him on board for future roles. I don't think that future was meant to be a season away. Maybe he was supposed to be in and around the club for a few years, and then he got promoted internally, like Thomas Frank did when he was our assistant coach, I think, for 2 seasons under Dean Smith. And then when Dean Smith left, he became head coach. So we do have a good track record. Look, Mark Warburton got into the playoffs, got us promoted, got us into the playoffs. Thomas Frank got us into the playoffs, got us promoted. So, there is a proven track record of success of promoting within, but you're doing that at a point where you've got so much more on the line. When Mark Warburton was made manager, we was in League One. We was in League One. We didn't have as much on the line as what we do now. Thomas Frank had already had first team experience, first team exposure as well, in more of an assistant coach role, like with Dean Smith and with Brøndby. So this is a huge risk, and there is a lot on the line. Premier League status is on the line here. People saying, yeah, but if you go down, you get parachute payments. But people do realise you get a lot more money for staying in the Premier League than you do being out of it. So it's a risk. It could go one of two ways, really, couldn't it? Let's be real. Like Dan says, if it doesn't go well if we're 1-0 down to Forest in the first 5 minutes, Jesus Christ, it is going to be a rather difficult away end to be in. But if we win that game and play well, it could be different.
We'll get into the nuts and bolts of it, but just before we do, I've got to point out Josh's tweet, just because it's become ironic, the fact that he tweeted, not being funny, but I'd take £5 million for Norgaard. Was an absolutely brilliant player, but his legs have completely gone. I think we can all agree that second part is just factually not true, especially after the season that he's had. I'd argue that is probably his most impressive season in a Brentford shirt. However, the first part, Dan, is that he said that he'd take £5 million for Norgaard, and I think I wasn't surprised that he wanted to go, but the fee, I can't get my head around the fee. Am I being stupid with that?
I think we could have got a bit more, but I mean, in reality, we know Christian Norgaard is a bit fragile. I think if he's asked to play more than once a week, he'd probably struggle with that a little bit. He's always picking up injuries here and there. I don't think he's a player that will have too many more years left in him at the top level, given his age now. And only a few months ago, if he hadn't signed the contract, then we could have been losing him for free right now. So any fee, looking at it that way, is a good thing. I think maybe we could have got a bit closer to maybe the 20 million mark. I think we ended up settling for around 10 in the end, didn't we? But I think it's still relatively good business, given that we won't get too much more out of him. But obviously it will hurt us in the short term, and any replacement that's younger and will be able to slot right in will likely cost more than that.
Craig, your thoughts? Good business, do you think?
I mean, Dan's right. It's a good job that he did sign that contract not long ago. Otherwise, he would have been leaving for nothing. So it's good to get something out of this. But so many points throughout this season, we've not criticised the team, but pointed out the fragility of the team when Christian Norgaard is not playing. So, yeah, he's a replaceable player, but we need to do that quickly. We need to do that quickly.
It's losing him on top of everyone else, isn't it? I think that's the big thing as well. It's not just a summer where we've lost him. It's the captain, the top scorer, probably the manager. And that's where we run into problems, or everyone gets a bit worried. It's just losing all these really key personnel, those who have an influence in the dressing room all at once.
100%. We'll talk about Norgaard a little bit later, but I think the top line is obviously Andrews. I'm so tempted to just title this podcast "What the fuck is going on?" because it's just like this last kind of couple of weeks. Life has come at us really fast. We've lost Thomas Frank. We've been linked to various managers. I want to get your two reactions to being linked with someone like Francesco Farioli. There was Eden Terzic, who was on that list of potential candidates to replace Thomas Frank. When we got the news, I don't know, when was it? A couple of days ago, that it was going to look that it's very, very likely that it's going to be Keith Andrews. What was your reaction, Craig? Were you still holding out for maybe another name, or did you see the writing on the wall?
Well, there was obviously the first thing that we need to probably address first is how is it taking so long? To appoint an internal hire. If it was going to be Keith Andrews, I'd have thought that this would have been done reasonably quick after Thomas Frank left. I think it's been 2 weeks now or 3 weeks now. How long? I don't know. It feels like 10 years since Thomas Frank left. Like I'm just stood still, but it's been a couple of few weeks since Thomas Frank has left. Yeah, we haven't announced an internal hire. We haven't announced Keith Andrews. I mean, and other managers at the moment are still really short odds to be made the next Brentford manager. I mean, Kieran McKenna is like 3-1. Lee Carsley, Ange Postecoglou's come really short as well recently. So, I mean, yeah, Francesco Farioli would have been really good for us probably, but we also what he did with Ajax at the end of last season as well. Different kettle of fish, I know, but I thought that if that was going to happen, it would have happened already. So maybe there is something holding this up. Maybe there is possibly a different person in the running. It just seems like if it was going to happen, it would have happened a little while back still.
Dan, given that the kind of the language used when the news broke that it was going to be Andrews was several high profile candidates were interviewed across Europe. What does that tell you about them potentially going for Keith Andrews? And to be fair, I was listening to Besotted the other day, and they were talking about the fact that it's been held up so long. Maybe there is another twist to come. We obviously haven't heard anything. I think it was reported on Sky, and then Sam Tabuto was tweeting as well, saying that it's supposed to be this week that they're supposed to be appointing him. So, given that they've interviewed several high-profile candidates across Europe, Dan, what does that tell you about Keith Andrews?
That's the difference, isn't it, between us appointing Warburton all those years ago in League One and now. All those years ago, we wouldn't have been able to attract the top names in Europe, which we can now. And someone like Warburton back then would have been seen as something a bit different that, maybe is a risk worth taking given the circumstances. But now it is very much the risk is picking someone with such inexperience in the top job over some people who have track record of doing really well abroad. So Keith Andrews has obviously said all the right things. He's been observed for the last year, and that's what us fans don't get to see. We don't get to see what he's done behind the scenes. We don't get to see the impact he's had on training, not just set pieces, but in general. We don't get to see, how good he is at continuing the culture that Thomas Frank built up. We don't get to see, things like team talks and how tactically astute he is and whether he has his own ideas, because it's important, I think, that he builds on Thomas Frank. He can't just stay the same. He's got to bring some of his own ideas to the table. So we've just got to hope and trust in the hierarchy that what they've seen in the last year is enough, and that he is actually a very good candidate to take us on. And we're just going to have to trust the management in that, because none of us can see what happens behind the scenes. And I think the thing that worries me the most is a lot of fans obviously none of us have seen that. So it will be very quick for things to go toxic if it doesn't start well. And that's what I worry about, because, our first 3 or 4 fixes aren't easy. That Sunderland away game could become a massive game, just the third game in the season. And it would worry me a bit if we go into that one without a win going into it.
Craig, Dan just talked about how sort of we haven't seen behind the scenes. So like the evidence in terms of people getting so wound up about this appointment, the evidence on our end isn't there because we haven't seen it. Do you? And I've just been a bit confused about people doubting the judgment of the people that have got us into this position. I feel like if they've interviewed several high profile candidates across Europe and have decided to go with Keith Andrews, they clearly think that he has the potential to be another Thomas Frank. Do you think that there's reason to doubt that decision-making process? Because I'm trying to sort of detach what we have and what they have. Obviously, as Dan said, they're seeing him behind the scenes. They've seen him for the last year. They've seen him do all these brilliant things, probably because they've decided to appoint him. We haven't seen that. So we are literally, is it blind faith? Is that what we're going to have to do?
Well, football fans are fickle. I mean, we all are. When we look at managers and whatnot that are coming in, if they don't have 5 years, 10 years of managerial experience, all of a sudden they're not good enough to be a manager. And I could eat my words, and Keith Andrews comes in and he is awful and he is not good enough to be a manager. But we've got, like I say, we've got proven track record of internal hires succeeding at Brentford. And Matthew Benham is obviously he's a Brentford fan. He has to trust someone with his club. And if he believes that Keith Andrews is the man that could do that, then I guess I don't see any reason why we shouldn't trust his judgment when he took a gamble on Mark Warburton. He took a gamble on Thomas Frank. He took a gamble on Lee Carsley originally as well, and that was a success. So, yeah, it is blind faith. We need seeing is believing, isn't it? Seeing is believing. At the end of the day, if he comes in and after 10 games we're rock bottom after not winning a single point, then I'm pretty sure that shows that he's shit.
I'd be very interested in, when he gets announced, I'd be very interested in his interview when that I'm sure Brentford will post when it is announced, and just how he comes across, how he speaks. I did actually listen to Thomas Frank's one for Spurs, and I thought he spoke really, really well. So hopefully, we'll see a bit about what the club have seen in him when he starts speaking, when it is announced. Hopefully maybe in pre-season we'll see him testing out a few new ideas, and we might start to get more on board with it. And I think that's important, given the uncertainty around him. And then you're thinking about players who might want to sign for the club as well. We really need to sell the project to them, because from the outside they might be thinking a bit like us. They've got this new manager, we don't really know who he is or what he's all about. So any potential players coming in, they need to be sold the project. They need to be shown what it is like behind the scenes, in order to replace the likes of Brian and Brumo and Christian Norgaard when they go.
How important is this knowing the club angle, do you think, for them? Because obviously they've gone through candidates. They decided to go with Keith Andrews. Craig, should we also be thinking about that, the fact that he knows the club and knows how Brentford works? Because we're not a typically run football club, are we?
Yeah, no, we're not. And to yes would probably be the short answer to that question. We should know, we should trust their judgment. And well, like you said, we're not a normal ran football club. We do things a little bit differently, and he's obviously bought into the philosophy of the football club and the way that Matthew Benham wants the club ran and the way that Thomas Frank wanted the team coached. He's obviously bought into that philosophy already. And if he could just maintain the style of football in which we play, whilst adding his own little tweaks into it, we could succeed with him. But it's just, it feels lackluster, doesn't it? It doesn't feel ambitious. It doesn't feel like we're going for it. This is the 5th season in the Premier League. You might be thinking there's an opportunity for us to push for European football. And this doesn't feel, as a fan, like the appointment that's going to go and get us that at the end of the season. We're as fans looking at, we're already, like Dan said it, I said it, we're already looking over our shoulder and the season ain't even started yet.
Yeah, it's such a weird one. I think, I was kind of looking for positives and searching the internet for anything on Keith Andrews over the last couple of days. I've listened to a couple of TalkSport segments. I know Martin O'Neill really doesn't think that highly of him. I don't know if you boys have watched that segment when they were talking about him a little bit, but apparently Keith Andrews was like a vehement opposer of when Martin O'Neill was in charge of Ireland and was one of his biggest critics. I read somewhere that it's viewed as a positive that he's worked with the likes of Sam Allardyce, Tony Pulis, Chris Wilder and Chris Hughton, and Thomas Frank. And the kind of sign-off line was that you've got like a mixture of old school traditional English ways of playing, but also your tactical insight from the likes of someone like Thomas Frank. I know that he's also quite highly thought of in the punditry world. I was listening to Darren Bent on TalkSport, and he said that he analyzes the game in a different way to a lot of other pundits. How much? The thing is, right, because I was kind of thinking when I was doing this episode, I need to find someone who knows a lot about Keith Andrews, but no one knows who the fuck he is, so it's so difficult. It's just
maybe we should just reach out to Keith Andrews to come on the pod and sell himself.
I think I found his old Twitter account, but he hasn't tweeted in years, and he used to tweet a load of nonsense. Like, I was like, is this really going to be our future manager?
He's just the Irish Martin Allen then.
Yeah, exactly, Martin Allen. But I just, is it key to get someone in, get backroom staff in who do have a little bit of experience, at least in the Premier League? Is that what we think? Because I know that there was rumours of Damien Duff. I don't think there's anything in that. But could that be another reason to the hold up, do you think, Dan, maybe? And do you think that if we're going to go for a manager who doesn't have experience as a manager or a head coach, that he needs people behind him who have been there and done it?
Yeah, well, several players have left, so we can keep appointing internally, but we're going to need to get somebody external in to replace those that have left. So, yeah, I think we need a top coach, because obviously Cochrane's gone as well. And we definitely need that team behind him. In terms of who that will be, no idea yet. But yes, again, even for future planning when Keith Andrews eventually gets poached by Manchester City. We need to get the next guy in, don't we, to plan ahead for the future. But yeah, he obviously definitely needs support. Who that will be, I have absolutely no idea. But it's important that happens, and that happens before pre-season starts, because it's important that they get the most time possible with the team to prepare for next season.
I just think that there is just so many unknowns at the moment, isn't there? I think what you said earlier, Craig, there's a lot on the line, and that's a criticism that I think, because I've been trying to sort of defend the club a little bit and say, we should have faith in the people that got us here and whatnot. And then like kind of looking back at the internal appointments in the past, Andy Scott, Mark Warburton, etc., Thomas Frank. But there is a lot more on the line in the Premier League, money-wise especially. But again, you could also argue that with money being on the line, Matthew Benham, this is the reason that he got us here. He's obviously a smart businessman, and there's £300 million on the line if you get relegated from the Premier League, if you stay in the Premier League, right? He's willing to take that risk. Should we not also buy into that? If he's willing to take that risk with his money, I just think that some of the backlash, I completely understand it, but I just don't think it's based on logic. Because if you take what we know of Matthew Benham, and if you take the fact that he's willing to take this risk on someone who we know nothing about, but it's a big risk, that's my kind of my gripe with some of the criticism that he's faced, or that Giles has faced in terms of Andrews. I don't know what you boys think of that. Silence is good for a podcast, by the way.
I think it's I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I think we've got to back him. We've got to back him, because this decision's being made no matter what. And of course, it's in everyone's interest for this to work. Keith Andrews as well. He's very much aware that he's not got a big name in management, and he's been given this fantastic opportunity for some of his experience, and this is his time to take it. And I don't think getting on his back after we lose on the opening day to Forest is going to help anybody. It will just put more pressure on. It will just make things turn toxic. And I think we've got to give him a fair chance. Obviously, we all know how Thomas Frank started. We can't afford to really start in that manner this season, because it's Premier League. Because when you're down there, and if you start to get a few points adrift, we've seen it before, teams really struggle to pick up any points. But we've got to get behind him, because this decision will be made whether anyone likes it or not. And I don't think Matthew Benham is particularly one to worry too much about, what the criticism from the outside is. I think he will very much be looking at the processes, how things work day to day on the training ground, whether that's all working and whether he's happy with all of that, and, whether he thinks that will translate to results on the pitch.
Craig?
I mean, you can't really add much more to what Dan's just said there. I mean, he obviously did well in what he did last season, defensively and offensively as well. I know some of our set pieces weren't fantastic, but I think we conceded the least goals from set pieces last season. So he obviously did the work right defensively, and we scored 3 goals inside the first minute from kickoffs. We've scored, I think, the most goals from throw-ins this season as well. Like, he's obviously doing the right thing. It's just whether or not he could do the whole thing.
Yeah. What do you think he can? Do you think he can do the whole thing? Do you think? I've got this fairy tale in my head that this is some magical appointment, and we're going to be top by Christmas.
that would be fantastic, wouldn't it? I mean, again, I said it right at the beginning, and I'll say it again now. He was brought in as a set piece coach, but he is not a set piece coach. Yeah. He is an all round coach.
He's a coach. Fundamentally, he's a coach.
He is, yeah. I don't want to say coach too many times in a sentence, but he is. So
what is he again?
He's a football tutor. But if he can do a niche as in set pieces and make it successful. Yes, granted, some of ours weren't fantastic throughout the season, but we did have a lot of success from that. If he can make a niche successful, he should, you'd imagine, be able to put that into practice across the whole as to what he did before, and it be a success. Fingers crossed.
But in reality, we have absolutely no idea.
In reality, we haven't got a clue. Yeah.
Let's move on to Norgaard. I think, Dan, you said it in the group chat. The quickest a transfer has ever come about. I think there was interest and it was deal done within a couple of hours. Makes sense for him, Dan?
Yeah, definitely for him. I don't know if there's a release clause in there or something from his recent contract which made it happen so quickly. But looking at him, I don't think he has more than a couple of years left in him at the top level. The fact he's got to be earning much more at Arsenal than he's ever earned in his career. I think he deserves the opportunity to play in Europe, to maybe win something with them, and he doesn't have the time that some of the younger players have left in the game. I don't necessarily expect him to start week in, week out for Arsenal, but even setting himself up financially for when he does retire, I think it's, you can't blame him at all for making that decision. And it's just, again, really sad that we're losing another big part of our side, losing the captain. And, this promotion winning squad under Thomas Frank now is just getting thinner and thinner. And, we're losing those memories. And obviously all these players had such a big part to play in that period.
We spoke about the fee, that we probably maybe could have got more for him. I've added something into the running order. Do you think there would have been value in keeping him for an extra 2 years, Craig, and just seeing out his contract? I know that that's not the way Brentford work, but I would have thought that having him in a transitional period that we're going to go through would have been more valuable to Brentford than the 10 million we're going to get from his transfer fee.
I don't actually know, to be honest. To be completely honest with that one, I think yes, and I think no, because there's always a good time to offload, isn't there? There's always the right time to have a player move on, to have a coach move on, in which Thomas Frank has done. And given how well respected Christian Norgaard was, how affluent he was at the club, with Thomas Frank leaving, this could possibly be the perfect time for him to leave, so that there can be a complete overhaul and there can be a new style of leadership coming into the football club. Because, I mean, providing, and I don't think he will, providing Nathan Collins stays, which I do think he will. I don't think he'll leave. And Keith Andrews comes. Nathan Collins is going to be our captain. I can almost guarantee that Nathan Collins will be captain next season. And then with Keith Andrews at the helm, Collins being the club captain or whatever he's going to be, this is going to be a completely new style of leadership. Not necessarily philosophy and not necessarily play, but the leadership style is going to change, and it could impact the way that we see next season going on. It's probably the right time. Now I think about it, it's probably the right time. With Thomas Frank going, we know the relationship that those two had. It would have been really difficult for Christian Norgaard to conform and change to a new style, what we're going to have to do next season.
How much of a miss will he be, Dan? And could you summarise what he's done for Brentford? I've got it here in the running order, our most important player in recent years. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think the contrast when he's on the pitch to when he's not on the pitch is bigger than most players that we have. So often players in his position, don't really stand out as a star, but he does deserve it. And he's been a leader on the pitch. We look so much better with him in the team this season, especially. He's showed he can score goals. He can, get the ball forward. He can do a bit of everything. And midfielders like that are rare. And when Yanelt tries to step into that position, or Yarmoliuk or whoever, it just doesn't quite look the same. So I think we do need to replace him. Also, the experience that he had, we've lost Ben Mee, him, and Flecken now, 3 players over the age of 30. We've got a very young squad, really, now. Apart from that, Ethan Pinnock's the only other one I can think of who is that kind of age. So do we need a bit more experience in the squad now, given that we've lost so much in one go? And I think that's the key, to be honest. I think if it was only Norgaard that left, or only Norgaard and Mbumo, maybe it'd be much easier to replace and move on. But the fact that we've lost so much of the leadership at once worries me a little bit. But yeah, I think Norgaard will definitely go down as one of our best ever players in his position, definitely. And he deserves this opportunity, and we can't criticise him at all.
in terms of that Norgaard replacement, Craig, do we already have one? Lots of people talking about Konak. Personally, well, I mean, I say personally, factually, he's not played really at all last season. He did look good in spells, but again, I think he's 19 or 20, very, very young. So we'd be
I've been
lining
waiting for this opportunity. Harry Potter was good at spells, but that don't make him a good midfielder.
Go on. Who do we need to sign? First of all, because Dan just mentioned that we're losing some of the older members of the group, Ben Mee, Christian Norgaard, etc. Do you want to see potentially an older head in midfield come in to kind of
Jordan Henderson?
You know what? I would 100%. I would take Jordan Henderson.
No,
100%.
I would for a year or so. Like, he is 35, but for a year or so.
Christian Eriksen back instead. Do not let Jordan Henderson anywhere near that. No.
But what about the Norgaard replacement then, Craig? What do you reckon?
Well, we do have younger players coming in, but experience is essential. We can't go into next season with, how old's Coyote? Early 20s. Early 20s at right back. Early 20s in goal. It was 25, isn't he? Which is still young for a goalkeeper. Early 20s in Collins and Sepp Vandenberg in centre back. A young KLP as well, who's only 25, maybe 26.
I think he's younger than that.
He could well be younger than that, yeah. And then you've got 19-year-old, 20-year-old Yarm Elliott, 19, 20-year-old Konak. Yeah, all right, we got a hairline of 40 in Damsgaard, but I'm not sure he's that old. We're going into the season with an average age of like 21, 22. We probably need an experienced head, maybe not necessarily to start, but Pinnock can't be our only experienced player. We probably need to bring someone in, even just as a squad player, that can bring that know-how, that knowledge, and that experience to what is a very young team.
And so it's not. I don't think it's out of the question of possibility to bring in like an old head in midfield, because we do have a track record of bringing in someone like that. Your Ben Mees, Winston Reid. Do you remember him? He was at Brentford.
Yeah, man.
But
he played in the playoff final as well. He came on in the playoff final.
But yeah, it's not outside the realms of possibility. In terms of next steps, Dan, do we need to get this Andrews announced ASAP? Because I just feel like Brentford fans at the moment, we're in limbo a little bit with everything that's going on. We need a little bit of clarity. And does that start with getting the Andrews announced?
Yes, and I think we need to see interviews and we need to see a bit of him so that we can all kind of understand why this decision was made and how he speaks and what his plans are, because hopefully that will go some way. Obviously there's only so far it can go, but it'll go some way to hopefully turning things around in terms of the reaction to the appointment. But yeah, I think we need to get that done. You would imagine the coaching staff, I know Keith Andrews is already there, so maybe this has happened in the background, but that they would have some input into potential signings. I know they won't get full input, but they would have some say. And it's just important then that I want the Norgaard thing to happen quickly. I want the Brian thing to happen quickly so we can then move forward, start pre-season, hopefully get players in to replace them as soon as possible. I've not seen many links, which is a bit concerning. I've seen Milambo from, I think, Feyenoord, who's been linked with us for a while now. But I think he's more of an attacking sort of midfielder player. So I think we need a holding midfielder. I think we need probably a right winger to replace Brian, unless we do really believe that Nunes can come in and start nearly every game in his place next season. So it would be nice to start seeing some links and to start seeing people come into the club.
Pete, in terms of that though, Craig, a lot of people are concerned about Andrew's sort of player pull in terms of incomings, how he's going to convince people. What we do know is that he was really good at convincing Matthew Benham and Phil Giles to get the job. we know that he's fantastic at interviewing. Do we think that that's going to help him in terms of bringing players in? I'm on the edge of. We spoke a couple of weeks ago and we said we were excited. I think it's now more creeping towards nervous than excited. But do we think that that's going to be a factor? And it kind of ties into that we don't know because we've not heard him speak yet. But you'd imagine that he's a good talker, and going off what pundits have said about him as well, that he's a good talker. So maybe he can start to convince players to come. And it feels like we're losing so many that we're going to need to start bringing some in.
Well, if the philosophy of the club stays the same, and he can talk up the club, I mean, like you say, he's obviously very good at this. If he can talk himself into a Premier League manager's job. So if he could talk himself into that, if he is able to stick to the philosophy of the football club itself, we shouldn't, I hope, as a club, have an issue with Paul. We're a semi-stable Premier League. I'm saying semi-stable because we don't know what the future is holding at the moment. Football club in the Premier League. We've maintained our status over the 5 seasons, and at no point, and hopefully no point in the future, have we looked in any danger. So that should have some pull in itself. Even just being in the Premier League should have some pull itself. I hope that it goes down to the club rather than the manager, because I don't feel like any new manager, with all due respect, has any pull. It's the club themselves. So fingers crossed and Matthew Benham can do what he does best. Lots
of scaremongers on social media over the last few weeks, Dan. I put a message in the chat that no one replied to, by the way, so thanks for that. About when are we? At what point do we get worried? Are you worried now? Are you worried?
I don't think worried's the right word. I think it's just uncertain and it's just a complete unknown. And I genuinely don't know what to expect. I think the squad should be good enough. Obviously, we are losing a few players, so maybe it'll be a bit of a transition season. But, the majority of the squad will be the same. I think they're more than good enough to stay in the Premier League. I think we should be staying in the Premier League. I would not be surprised to see it being a bit more of a transition season and us be around 15th, 16th. And I wouldn't necessarily say that would be a disaster at all. I think, even Keith Andrews will probably need a bit of time to adapt, and hopefully he should get better as he goes along. But also taking into account that you're losing your captain, Brian and Bumo, people like that. So I wouldn't say I'm worried yet. I don't think worried's the right word. I think we just know so little about him, and that is just going to make us a bit uncertain, I think.
Craig, what do you reckon? There's a lot of people, broadcasters, tipping us as relegation favourites next season. Is that in your head at the moment?
No, not really. I mean, aren't we like one of the favourites every season for relegation?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Aren't we one of the favourites every season for relegation? So, yeah. It's more so now because of the risk that we're looking at taking in Keith Andrews. People are looking at an inexperienced manager and going, well, and the track record of Irish managers in the Premier League as well. There's a possibility that we could succeed. There's a possibility that we could really, really fail. But we've got, like I said it before, I say it again, we've got a track record of successfully replacing managers with internal hires. If this follows the track record, fantastic. If it doesn't, then we make a change. But we have to make that. We as a club have to be willing to take a risk and make that change sooner rather than later.
Dykhouse until the end of the season if it all goes tits up.
Yeah, get him in. Get Lee Carsley back.
That's the thing. If it does go wrong, Matthew Benham's been shown in the past to not mess about. If he's not happy with how just the fundamentals of it is working in terms of training, and if he doesn't believe that will eventually lead to results, he will take action and he will hire somebody else early on. That doesn't necessarily mean, if we do poorly on the pitch, he'll do that. But if he's not happy with the processes, which he believes it will lead to results, then he will take action early on. And, Keith Andrews, I'm sure will be monitored in his first few weeks and months to make sure that everything is still on track.
Boys, I think that would be a good point to round things off, unless there's anything else you want to add to that little therapy session. I felt like that was more of a therapy session than the last one. I feel like we're a bit more, I think we're sadder this week. That was a bit more sad. But yeah, we hope you've enjoyed the pod. The Eater podcast will be back whenever we know anything more. This summer break that we had planned has really not materialized, but we'll be back whenever announcements are made. I expect this to be a busy summer ahead with the windfall that we're going to get over the transfers of Brian and Bumo, Christian Norgaard, all of these players that seem very keen to be leaving straight after Thomas Frank has left. But we will still be here. We are not going anywhere. So remember to drop a comment down below with your thoughts around everything that's been going on with Brentford over the last couple of weeks. Subscribe to the YouTube and Spotify channels. Follow us on the socials at the Ealing Road on Twitter at Ealing Road Pod on Instagram. Gents, another good therapy session. Someone said that we should start charging people for these. What do you reckon?
I agree.
Yeah, a transfer bid finally.